Hello and greetings everyone. I really appreciate the time that you take to watch my videos. Today I want to talk about a topic that is close to my heart and very important to me personally, which is cultural appropriation. Now, for those of you who are not familiar with the term, cultural appropriation is the idea that one culture or one population, basically in most cases a minority group, is entitled to everything that culture ever brought forth. And the most important part about this, that no one else is allowed to use that. One example that is often given is the idea of dreadlocks for black people, which means that black culture came up with dreadlocks and white people are not allowed to use dreadlocks because they didn't come up with it, and that it would be offensive or somehow degrading black people or the accomplishments of the black race in any way to use anything that they ever created. Now, before I go into the topic, a quick disclaimer: I'm not an expert on this, I'm not a professor or something, but I still think that I'm very well educated on the topic, as I basically study cultures in all kinds of relations with each other, and I'm doing a lot of videos about culture of divorce, Germanic culture. And since I personally belong to, well, let's say a minority, I kind of think that I know what I'm talking about, but it's up to you to judge. You can check whatever I say, and please do not just believe me right away, just look it up for yourself. And so what you will be hearing is mainly my opinion on this topic. So let's start. Cultural appropriation is a very, very dangerous and stupid idea. Mainly because it does a lot of harm, in special to minority groups. Let's just think through what world we would live in if cultural appropriation would be made law. Let's say that really one culture can only use what that culture specifically produced. What would that mean for minority groups like black people in the USA? It would mean no internet, no cars, no fancy clothes, no suits, no dresses, no, well, almost, let's say, 90% of the technology that you're using right now was created by white or Asian people. And in the US, most of the things that you will have available to you, streets, skyscrapers, likely the job that you're working in, fast food, and so on and so forth, were all made by white people. So it's white culture, which basically means that if you are black and you really are for cultural appropriation, you should definitely stop wearing anything else than a loincloth, because that was the, let's say, most common dress in Africa, in black Africa. You would likely have to move to a house built out of very, very basic materials, at the worst even cow dung, because that's what they actually built the houses out of. No electricity. Healthcare is basically some voodoo magic with a guy whacking your head to get the demon of disease out of your body. And really, most foods that you would eat were pretty raw or totally burned in a campfire. And I don't understand how people really can believe in this cultural appropriation thing when they're using so many things from other cultures. The tablet PC that you may be using, your iPhone, that's all white inventions from white people, and I haven't seen white people complaining about black people abusing their culture because they are having iPhones or something. And I can see the uproar that would follow if someone demands it. Now, I'm totally not demanding it. I'm just saying, if you really want that every culture only uses the things that it itself came up with, think that through. What does that mean for your minority group or majority group? For me personally, it would mean that I wouldn't eat as much Chinese food, or basically no Chinese food anymore, because my culture didn't come up with Chinese food. For some black guy, it would mean no internet, no computer, no car, and no electricity, no this nor that, no books even, and it just gets out of hand very quickly. If we go so far as pulling language into this, English is a clearly white language. It was created by ancient Germanic tribes, or better said, that was Proto-German, and was then spread into 3 dialects, one of which happened to finally evolve into a form of Old English, which finally became Modern English as we know it. Of course, there were some add-ins from French and Norse. English in itself is already a language composed of many other languages. Some say it's a hybrid language because it has some heavy Romance influences from Latin and French, and also from German and Old Norse. Others say, no, it's clearly a Germanic language because the grammar structure, the most vocabulary is still from the Germanic roots. So however you will look at that, if we go really, really deep into this cultural appropriation thing, then English itself would have to be banned, because English in itself is already an appropriated language from the Romance and the German languages. So no more English for everyone, or at least not for non-white people, because English is clearly a white language. So far so good. Now, it's just so ridiculous to demand that. What would the world look like if it did that? Do you know Halloween? You know, it's coming very soon, and Halloween basically is a Celtic festival. It's I'm not sure what's the original, Samhain or something like that. Some say Samhain, it's pronounced something very different than that. But Halloween would only be for people of Celtic descent, which are very few. Maybe the Irish can still claim Celtic descent, but everyone else, not really. English people, no. Almost all the Celtic population of Great Britain was already driven out by the Romans, then driven out by the Germans, then driven out by the Norse, and conquered by the French. So you can't really say that English have Celtic roots. A few maybe, but most definitely not. So maybe the Irish, maybe very few people in France, but really a very, 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 very small group, because the Celts in France were also driven out by the Romans and then by the Germans and so on and so forth. So Halloween only for Irish people. Okay. No more Halloween for anyone else. Christmas. Now Christmas is a little bit more complicated because it has more than one root. Its main root is the Germanic festival of Yule, which was basically most of what we think of Christmas, you know, including the Christmas tree, including, well, having the family together, and most things that we think of being Christian about the whole Christmas thing is actually Germanic. And the idea of giving presents mostly comes from the Roman festival of Sol Invictus, or Saturnalia, and that was also kind of a Romance thing and a Germanic thing, and those two are the main roots of Christmas. Now there were some later additions over time. Christianity did put a few things in there that weren't there previously, but mainly it's a Germanic holiday with a lot of Roman influences and a little bit of Christian spicing on top. But basically everyone who is not of German or Germanic or Roman descent has no right to, celebrate Christmas. And that's really it. It's cultural appropriation if you are not of Germanic or Roman descent and are still celebrating Christmas. It's just wrong according to cultural appropriation. Easter. Easter is another Germanic holiday, a Germanic feast for the goddess Ostara, hence the name, and it's really a Germanic festival. So if you're not of a Germanic descent, you are not allowed to celebrate Easter either. And there are actually a lot of holidays that shouldn't be celebrated by anyone but those of Germanic descent, which is ludicrous if you ask me. It's just funny. It's stupid actually. So, and another thing that bothers me is that black people on the internet claim things for the culture that actually the culture did not come up with. Dreadlocks as example. Now dreadlocks are basically not washing your hair for a long time and getting it really messed up in very, very messy locks. Black people did not invent that. We actually have historical recordings that those styles of hair were already worn by a few ancient Germanic tribes, namely the Langobards, long beards. They were described by, I think it was Tacitus, who actually said that they had very long, extremely messy hair that happened to be in kind of very, very, very tangled locks. So there you have it. The Germanic people came up with dreadlocks about 2000 years before the black people. So if black people wear dreadlocks, they're actually appropriating Germanic culture. Thus, no more dreadlocks for black people. And you see how ridiculous this gets, because we really have the first historical records of this in the Germanic region. You know Ragnar Lothbrok, the Viking. Lothbrok could translate as messy hair, messy locks actually, or tangled hair, or tangled locks. So we don't know for sure, but Ragnar Lothbrok could have worn a thing similar to dreadlocks. There's also a story of another Viking, whose name I have to look up again, who was so grieving for the death of his wife that he said that he wouldn't wash his hair anymore until he avenged her death, which basically led him to not washing his hair for years, and thus he also wore dreadlocks in around 900 AD. So long before black people claimed dreadlocks, they were already there and made by white people. The next thing I want to address here is the funny idea that somehow white people are to blame, that everything wrong that happened to black people. I mainly say black people because people of other colors do not really complain as much about that. You see, Europe did not rob Africa of everything, and not everything that Europe brought forth is based on African stuff. You can see a lot of marvelous buildings, great buildings, cathedrals and castles and everything that were built long before Europe had any real contact with black Africa. So the idea that Europe's riches depend on slave work from black people is just wrong. Also, the idea that white people were the only ones taking slaves is just wrong. Black people had a lot of black slaves. There were black slave owners in the US who put black people to work at some banana plantage or something. There were black people selling out other black people, capturing black people as slaves and selling them to white people. There were a lot of horrendous crimes done to black people by black people. Take Shaka Zulu, who murdered and massacred so many black people for so stupid reasons. Or, yeah, I'm not going into history too much, don't worry. I just want to say that crimes against humanity are human. Do you think Asians didn't commit crimes against humanity against other Asians? Just look what samurais did in Japan, or how Chinese people treated each other, or how white people actually got treated by Arabs. You know, still to this day there are white slaves working in Saudi Arabia. Not many, to be fair, but back in the early 20th century it was still very common to have white slaves. So the whole idea that slavery is a white thing is just so wrong on so many levels. And also, why should someone be responsible for the crimes of his ancestors? Why should I be responsible for the crimes of Austria during the Second World War? I wasn't born then. My parents weren't born then. My grandfather was actually in the resistance. So why should I be blamed for things that some other people that I happen to be the same skin color were doing? Because that goes really far, you know. Humanity goes back to very few roots. You know, population was very low earlier, and we all have criminals in our families. We may not be aware of that because I don't think that your grandmother would talk about the crimes of her grandfather, but we all have people in our families that were abhorrent. We all have child rapists, murderers, robbers, and stuff like that in our ancestry. It's bound to happen. You too, everyone. And if we are held responsible for the deeds of our ancestors, then yeah, we all should be put into jail. Every single one. Black people too. Asian people too. And so on and so forth. Now, I got a bit sidetracked here to cultural appropriation. The real problem is that we couldn't even tell what culture came up with which and who is entitled to what achievement, because cultures mix. When two cultures meet each other, they will automatically appropriate from each other. When the Romans met any culture, they took some things of those cultures into their own. That's what happened to the British as well. They took things that were common in other regions as British. Drinking tea is seen as very, very British, but actually the Brits were almost the last one who came up with drinking tea. But it's seen as very British, because they were the ones perfecting it. Like the internet. The internet was not invented by the US, but it was mainly made prominent and working by the US, so they claim it for them, even though they didn't actually come up with it. And there are so many things that rely on other achievements, like take the light bulb. Thomas Edison. Thomas Edison did not invent the light bulb. He made the first light bulb that was actually working for days before breaking. And that was a major breakthrough, but the light bulb was actually invented by some guy from Denmark. And you see, things that you think are typically American or something like that actually come from other cultures. And the very same goes for pretty much anything, you know. Fortune cookies are not a Chinese invention. This is actually a US invention. And, you know, there are so many things that we think belong to one culture but really stem from another. Lasagna, as example, actually does not come from Italy. Schnitzel does actually not come from Austria. I'm so sidetracked here. Croissants actually come from Austria and not from France, and so on and so forth. So we call them Kipferl if you are interested. So the thing is that we have so many wrong ideas which culture brought forth what stuff, that it's already a real problem to get people to accept the facts. And the real problem is that cultures mix with each other, that you cannot tell who came up with what. Cultures are often created by populations clashing together. As example, the Germanic Scandinavian Norse mythology was very likely the result of invading tribes from Asia, meeting with the native European tribes of Scandinavia, clashing together, and the two pantheons merged into one. The Aesir were the ones back from Asia, the Vanir were those native to Europe. So two people clashed with each other and created a new culture together. That happens all the time. Culture is nothing fixed. It grows, it evolves, it collapses, it brings in new ideas. As example, most things that we in Germany appreciate about German culture was actually brought in by other people. Beer. Who invented beer? The Phoenicians, not the Germans. Who invented lederhosen? The Jews, not the Bavarians, funnily enough. Who invented the dirndl? Also the Jews, not the Bavarians. And many things that we take for granted here in Germany actually come from cultures outside Germany. Yet everyone says, hey, that's German culture, beer and stuff. No, it's not. Wine wasn't invented by the Germans. Actually, the Germans were pretty much the last ones in Europe who really made wine, you know, and so on and so forth. What I'm really trying to tell is that some cultures came up with things simultaneously, like the process of smelting iron or smelting copper, producing bronze. Those were things that several cultures around the globe came up with on their own. So who is entitled to that? No one? Everyone? We don't know. The idea of printing books, the first one who came up with it were the Chinese. But the Germans also invented it a few centuries later, but they came up with that on their own. They didn't steal it from the Chinese, even though the Chinese were the first to use it. Who is entitled to it? The Chinese? The Germans? Who knows? And more importantly, sometimes cultures just stopped existing, like, say, the ones who invented iron. Those cultures are so long gone that we have nothing in common with them whatsoever. And we couldn't possibly say who would be entitled to the process of smelting iron today, because we don't know. The culture that came up with it died so long ago that we can't even trace back who has ancestors from that culture. So, and the culture itself is dead long ago. I mean, it's dead for so long that we don't know most things about that culture at all. So we can't say who is the heir to that culture, who is allowed to continue and claim their achievements. Or we say, okay, those achievements were done by a culture that is not alive today. We have to ban it and basically reinvent the wheel, because the culture that invented the wheel also died so long ago. We have no idea who came up with that. And that's just so stupid. And it's also toxic to society, because society relies on people living together. As a Jew, I have to point out at the Vikings here. The Vikings didn't give a fuck what culture you came from. For them, it was important that you contributed to society, that you worked, and that you helped others. As long as you were a valuable member of society, they didn't care what religion you have. They didn't care what nationality you had. They didn't care where you came from, what your color is, or basically anything. They cared about you doing work. And as long as you did that, they were fine with it. That's one of the reasons why Christianity could spread so fast among the Norse people, because they didn't care. It was really your business. Um, in the it's a lot of generalization here, but in general, you could get away with many crimes, like murder. You got fined for murder, blood money. You could pay for murder. You kill someone, oops, sorry, didn't meant to do it, here's $200, now stop complaining. Okay, more than $200, but you know, the basic idea. Because people were so valuable to society that losing someone or imprisoning someone or killing someone would be toxic to the society in itself. Losing someone was really a blow to everyone. So they try to figure out ways so that everyone can be happy and everyone basically has the same rights. So they also accepted a lot of cultures into their own society. Now, for those black people who are Christians, Christianity is not a black religion. I wouldn't say it's a white religion, but it's definitely Middle East, you know, Middle Eastern religion. So if you're black, stop being a Christian. That's white, and you know that whole bullshit. It's so stupid. It hurts. Also, and I hope this will be about the last statement I make here. The thing is that minority groups actually benefit from cultural appropriation, because if a group of, let's say, 2,000 people has some cultural things like special style of clothing, music, or whatever, and they don't share it with the outside world, almost no one will know about this. Almost no one will think about it. No, almost no one will recognize it or give you any props for coming up with that. Almost no one will ever take notice of it, and very likely your cultural inventions will die out and vanish from this planet forever. That happened a hell lot of times in the history of mankind. The only way for culture to survive is to spread. Why do so many people today speak English? Because the English Empire spread. Why do so many people celebrate Germanic festivals? Because the Germanic culture spread. Why do we have so many influence from Latin and from Rome, ancient Rome? Because it spread. Why is Chinese so influential in Asia? Because the Chinese spread. And that's really the thing. If you do not spread your culture, it will die out and vanish forever. So your best chance to keep your culture alive is to share it with everyone who is interested in it, to promote it, to get other people out there and celebrating your culture. Let them have fun with it. I don't say allow them to mock it. It's free speech, you know. If they want to make fun of it, let them. They will make fun of it anyway. That's free speech. That's okay. It may be offensive, but you're not forced to listen, you know. If a comedian makes fun about things that I think are offensive, you know what? I don't listen to that comedian, but I don't go there and say, don't listen to this guy, what he says is stupid and offensive and stuff. You have to get over it. You have to accept that some people think this way and move on. You can't change those people, and if you try to censor these people, it will lead to, you know, Second World War. You know, it started with censorship and stuff. Totalitarian societies with censorships are really, no one wants to live in such. You yourself will be hurt if free speech is somehow in any way limited. Okay? Just to get it out. You will suffer from that too. Everyone will. And the ones deciding what topics can be discussed without being put into prison, you won't be one of them. Just to be clear about it. It will be very stupid and difficult for everyone. So, cultural appropriation is a stupid, really, really harmful thing, and I hope we get over that soon, because it's just so outrageously stupid. It's just dumb. And that's my final statement on the topic. Thank you for watching. Please leave comments, subscribe, give me a thumbs up if you agree, or a thumbs down if you disagree. But if you disagree, I would hope that you are polite enough to explain why in the comments. Thanks for watching and see you next time.